So in the last video, we had a look at bringing our effects returns into this session so that as soon as we start editing, or as we're editing, as we're starting to build our mix, we can quickly send out our vocals to our effects change to start hearing our production in a more final and polished form. Now in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up from where we left off, and we need to start tackling some of these background vocals. So I'm not going to spend too much time on the actual comping because I think you guys have seen my workflow. I work in the same way every time I comp and edit. The first thing I do is I always expand my takes. I comp together the best take that I can based upon the takes that I have. I then do my manual de-essing, like I showed you a couple videos back, and I level off any words that I can to make the take sound cohesive. And then my last step is duplicating the layer or playlist, depending on which DAW you work in, and then consolidating it so that I'm working with one contiguous clean audio file for my pitch correction. So that process doesn't change for me ever, so I'm not going to spend any time working with that. But what we are going to look at right now is having a look at some of these elements over here. So for example, this is something that's been driving me a little bit crazy, this section over here. So what we're going to do here is we're going to focus on some manual editing and getting these in shape. So let's have a quick listen to what we're working with over here. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to solo out these 3 tracks over here. And actually, we don't need to hear the music necessarily right now. We might need to listen to it later so that we can reference our editing against all of the tracks. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to unsolo safe my bass and my electric guitars. Now we're going to head back up to the top here. So the idea here is pretty simple. We need to make sure that these 2 vocals over here, this Vox lead verse 2 and Vox lead verse 3, these are kind of like doubles, and we need to make sure that these sound good against each other first. So I would solo these out. Let's just have a listen to see how they're sounding. Lied, you'd never keep. I fell. Okay, so that definitely needs some work over here. Let's hear them against the lead vocal. And we'll go ahead, we'll start from bar 16. Truth is you lied to me. Promises you would never keep. And I fail every single. So we've got a little bit of work to do here. So the first thing I'm going to do over here is just for my memory's sake over here, I can't remember if I have any takes. So this one looks like I just did a manual punch in here. So the representation we see of this comp over here is pretty much all we have. Let's have a look at the next one. Okay, so we've got some other options for this one, so they may or may not sound better. Usually when I do a second take, it means that I didn't like the first take and I want to at least give myself another option. And it looks like I only did 1 take here on the back end, so that means I'm probably was happy with that. So let's go ahead and let's solo this out. Lied, you'd never keep. Okay. So this one is a little out. Let's see if we have it better. So I'm going to take snapping off, do a bit of a data zoom here. Let's go ahead and let's just bring this one. You'd never keep. Okay, so that's going to work better. Let's see how we like this one. Lied. Let's see if it's any better here. Lied. You'd never keep. Okay, that sounds pretty good to me. Let's listen to the 2 of them now against each other. Lied. You'd never keep. I fell. All right, so these are starting to sound good. So the first thing that I would do is I'd probably line these 2 up against each other. So let's just put our snapping mode on. Okay, now one thing here, when you're doing this type of editing, lots of DAWs have an option where you can basically group these 2 channels. And in Pro Tools, you can choose between an edit group or a mix group. Now in Studio One, they're the same thing. So let's go ahead and let's create a group and we can just see how that behavior is. Meaning that if I highlight across one over here, that it highlights across them both. Now this is good for some things, but if we have to do any manual work to one track over the other, unless there's a way to quickly suspend that group, then it can be a bit of a pain. So a lot of the times I will simply, use my tools here to make a lasso selection if I want to affect both sets of events or regions on a track. So I don't always necessarily work that way, but if your DAW has that and you want to work that way, that's an option. For this case, I'm just going to go ahead and disable this. So the first thing I want to do here is I want to start cleaning up some of these edits over here. So I'm going to go in, like I said, if I'm working on a grid mode, I always like to make sure that I make my cuts on an even quantized value. In this case, it would be on the quarter note over here. So I'm just going to clean these up a little bit here to start off with. Let's get rid of some of the silence in between these. We don't necessarily need that. This one we can take out. And again, I'm in a grid mode over here. And this one, I'll take this out over here. So now these are a little bit cleaner, and I could add some fade ins and fade outs as well. But before I do that, I like to make sure that my positioning is well. So let's listen to these two against each other.
Light.
Okay, that's not bad. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lasso select both of them, and I'm just going to do crossfade here. Sorry, a fade in here and a fade out here. So now we have this.
Light.
Okay, let's move on to these guys.
You never keep.
Okay. I've got some inconsistencies in terms of the volume. Now, one thing I might do is even just visually, I might just level these out. I'll either bring the loud ones down or the quiet ones up. I usually like to bring the loud ones down. And I can kind of visually match these up so that they're a bit better paired.
Light.
Okay, these ones over here.
You never keep.
Okay, so what I'm probably going to do over here is I'm just going to quickly, I'll hop out of grid mode for this. I'm just going to quickly grab this one here. I'll break this. I'm going to bring this down a little bit so it's more in line with this one. And this one over here, I'll just split this over here, and I'm going to bring this up a little bit so that it's more in line with this one. Now I can see another problem that we have here where the timing isn't necessarily going to match on this. So let's have a listen to these.
You never keep.
Okay, let's listen to both of these together.
Keep.
All right. I can tell you that we don't need this P, and if I listen to the main track over here,
Or keep.
okay, that P is happening on this back end. So that tells me right over here that I can come in and I can just edit this out. I don't need that at all. And then I can come into the back end here and we'll just add a little bit of a fade out over here. Okay, so that just tightens up that edit. Now, as I mentioned before, in Studio One, anytime that I'm doing something where I have events like this or regions, I always go ahead here and I can just click the X and that automatically adds some 10 millisecond crossfades for me. Now we can go in here and I can just adjust. I can add a fade in on the front end. And now this part, we got to take care of this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to align the two vocals here. I'm going to align these to each other, and then I'm going to align these to the main one. So I want to make sure that these play off of each other properly. Now, depending on how you like to work, there's a couple different ways that you can do this. So like I said, one of the ways that we can do it is simply by dragging this, and you'll notice that I've relieved myself of the grid. I don't have my grid snapping on right now. And then I can just extend this out. Holding down a modifier key will snap me back to my grid so that I can make sure this is nice. But one way that I like to do it in Studio One is I just like to make a separation here, and then I like to use the slip command. So sometimes I'll cut my edit points, and then I'll use this slip command just like that. And then I can just move this over as needed, like here. Or in the case that I don't want it at all, I can simply highlight over here and delete it. Now let's listen to how these play against each other.
I fell.
Couple different issues that I'm noticing here. The main one is that this is longer and this is shorter. So track 2, it's a little bit shorter. I think the best thing to do here, though, would be that at this point, we need to kind of bring this in against the lead vocal. So now let's bring in our lead vocal and let's start to listen to how our work is sounding here with relative to the two doubles to each other and against the lead vocal.
You lied to me.
Okay, so already I can hear a bit of an issue here, and that's that this needs to happen a little bit sooner. It doesn't seem too bad on the back end.
Lied to me.
But I think overall they could both come. So what I'm going to do is I'll just split those two there. I'm going to just slip this back a bit using my modifier keyboard shortcut in Studio One, which allows me to slip the contents. And here I'm just going to use the apex of this note as a visual guide for where I need to go to. So let's say that the apex here, this point needs to line up with this point. And I'm just going to, like I said, I'm leaving my edit points and I'm just going to slip these like this. And let's try that out. Let's see if that sounds any better. Maybe we'll move back one bar.
Truth is you lied to me.
One more time.
Truth is you lied.
Okay, these can even come back a little bit more, I think. From here.
Truth is you lied to me.
Okay, so that's sounding better. And now let's play from here.
Promises you will never keep.
And I want to just tighten up the timing on this a bit as well. So these guys here, I want to bring them back a little bit more as well. So these two over here, same thing. I'm just going to slip this audio back. And let's see how that sounds. And let's go give ourselves a bar pre-roll.
Promises you will never
Okay, so here we have another issue in that these two don't really line up. Let's take this one out. Let's play from here.
Keep.
I'm not going to concern myself too much because they're going to be pretty buried in the mix.
Keep.
Okay, so I'm not going to worry about that too much, but there's another issue over here, and I think we might run into some problems. So again, we can do some volume leveling if we need to. Like I could bring this one down a little bit, and I could bring this one down a little bit. Maybe I need to bring this one up a little bit, and we're just visually matching these. So let's have a listen to these now.
Die. Fail.
So again, we got the same issue. This is swelling, so at this point, this word has already happened. So again, I'm just going to select these two events here. I'm going to slip this back a little bit so that this happens kind of right on the mark there.
And die. Fail.
Okay, so that's tightened things up a little bit. Now, the two issues I'm seeing here are with these ones, is that they seem to be a little bit longer than the second take. Now, most DAWs have some type of time compression and expansion tools. So in Pro Tools, that'd be Elastic Audio. Logic, it's Flex Time. In Studio One, it's called Audio Bend. So we've got two approaches we can take here. I can do some type of time stretching to the actual audio clip over here, or the audio region, and I can do that in Studio One by holding down a modifier key like this. But what I might want to do instead of making this one longer is I might want to make this one shorter. So you can either use some type of, process like this where you can line things up visually. That's one way that we could do it. Let's have a listen to that.
And die. Fail.
Now, this one, we have the issue where we need to correct this timing. So let's slip the start of both of these back. Have a listen from here.
And die. Fail.
Okay, now let's look at another way that we can tackle this. Like I said, most DAWs have some type of, tool that allows you to adjust or tweak the timing in terms of, warping the audio. So what I'm going to do is in Studio One, that's called Audio Bend. I'm going to open up the Audio Bend menu. I'm going to make this visible. Now, usually you do some type of transient detection, which will place the bend markers in there for you, or the flex markers, or, the warp markers, or whatever you end up calling it. I've got a tool in Studio One here that allows me to do that manually. I'm going to make sure that I'm not in the grid mode, and I'm just going to do a bit of a data zoom so I can see what I have here. I'm going to anchor down this point. I'm going to anchor down this point over here at the end, and then I'm just going to grab this, and I can now just align these visually. So I've aligned this one with this one over here. Let's have a listen to that.
Die. Fail.
Okay, perfect. Now I don't need to see this view anymore, so I'm going to get rid of this. And now what I can do is I can clean up these edit points if I want to. So what I might do in this case is I might hop back into snapping, and let's make sure that we're on the right tool over here. Lasso, select these, take these, and I'll put a fade in over here, and I'll make this a nice even cut over here, and we'll add a fade out on the back end here. And then I can add this over here. I could add a fade in at the very beginning. I don't need much, so just a little one, something like that on both of them. And then I could add a fade out as well. So now I've got all these edits done, and we can have a quick listen. Let's just make sure that it all sounds good. So I'll play from here.
You lied. You lied.
And I want to listen to that against the music.
Truth is you lied to me. Promises you would never keep. And I fail.
So we need to fix keep and fell. So I'm going to do that really, really quickly. We're just going to take these guys and we'll bring this back. In fact, we'll go back down to here. I just want to bring these guys in just a little bit. I think I maybe overdid it here. So let's pull this back just a little. Slip these back. Okay, that sounds a little bit better. And let's listen to fell.
And I fail.
Okay, these guys, I just want to adjust this a little bit more this way.
Fail.
Excellent. So now at this point, what I would do is I would just go ahead and I would consolidate these into a contiguous audio event so that we can do any tuning. But what I'm probably going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to finish off the other section over here that happens down, and then I'll catch up with you in the next video.